Hello, teachers from all around the world, and good afternoon if you are in Southeast Asia. Welcome to VUS TESOL Webinars 2021. My name is Trân and I'll be your host today. Before we start, can I check if everybody can hear me well? If yes, give me a yes in the chat box, please. Thank you, everyone. I can see that we are all good to start. This free webinar series is held by VUS with the participation of ELT experts and invited speakers from well-known publishing houses, such as Cambridge University Press, Cambridge Assessment English, eFuture, Macmillan Education, Publications, National Geographic Learning, Oxford University Press, StudyCat, and VUS. We hope to bring you the most updated ELT trends and practical teaching methods and techniques so that you can teach your class more effectively. Before we start, it's my pleasure to announce the lucky draw winners from the webinar on the 20th of July, last Tuesday. These winners were randomly selected among those who completed the feedback after the webinar. The winners are Thái Ngọc Trân, Lê Phương Nhi, Nguyễn Xuân Diễm Hương, Nguyễn Thị Tuyết Minh, and Từ Gia Huy. Congratulations. Each of you will receive a professional development online course from Cambridge Assessment English. VUS or the sponsor will contact you shortly for the prize receipts. So please check your mailbox regularly. Thank you. And please be informed that we will have the Q&A section at the end of the webinar also. During that time, I also sent you the link to complete the survey for this webinar and to download your certificate of participation. And now we are pleased to have you all in today's webinar, Live Competencies, Seeing the 4C's in 3D, presented by Mr. Allen Davenport from Cambridge University Press. Let me introduce to you Mr. Allen Davenport. Now over to you, Allen.
Thank you very much, Tran. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm really excited to be sharing this session with you. Like it mentioned, this is going to be about life competencies and the 4C's, but just so I can get an idea of where everybody is coming from us with, if you could, in the chat box, if you're in Vietnam, let me know which city that you're joining in. And if you're from outside of Vietnam, let me know what country you're joining from, just so I can kind of get an idea of where we're coming at from all around the places. I just really would like to see. Already looking through the list, I've seen some people whose names seem familiar. I see a lot of Ho Chi Minh City, some from the Philippines, some from Dong Nai, some from a lot of Ho Chi Minh City, some from Can Tho, one of my favorite places. So glad to see everybody from all around the world, and especially my friends in Vietnam. It's just so nice. I hope that as we're going on through this, that you'll be active in the chat box. I'm going to turn it off sometimes just because I can get distracted, if you know me. But please feel free to chat with each other, and I will be asking for some input in the chat box as we do this. But without any further ado, I probably should share my slides and talk about what we're supposed to be talking about today. And that is about life competencies, seeing the 4C's in 3D. Some of you may have seen me present on life competencies before from Cambridge Life Competencies. If you saw the very last live VUS conference in 2019, I presented on it there in one of the keynotes, but this is not the same session. In the past 2 years, we've taken this concept even further. So if this is something you think you've seen before, keep watching because I've got a lot of new stuff. And if this is something you haven't seen before, don't worry, we'll take it step by step. So without any further ado, I want to start with a quote. And this quote isn't really about emergency remote teaching or teaching online. It's just about the idea of education in general. And the quote is from a famous educator, and it sounds like this. For more than 100 years, much complaint has been made of the unmethodical way in which schools are conducted, but it is only within the last 30 that any serious attempt has been made to find a remedy for this state of things. And with what result? Schools remain exactly as they were. And I like this quote because, as we talk about life competencies, they go by a lot of different names. Sometimes you may hear them being called soft skills or transferable skills, or I think what this quote may be talking about sometimes 21st century skills. But I think that it's something that we've been talking about, like this quote says, for a long time. But sometimes it feels like things just don't change, even though we're talking about the 4C's, communication and collaboration and creativity and critical thinking. Just for fun, in the chat box, do you agree with this quote or do you disagree with this quote? If you don't have an opinion, you can just leave it blank. But I'm just wondering in the chat box, do you think this quote is accurate based on your experience? Or do you think this quote is totally wrong? And it's okay if you disagree, by the way. It's lack of appropriate training and lack of interest in being trained, Amir. I saw that. Thank you. Totally agree. A lot of agreeing here. That's I in fact, partially agree, Mama. I'll let you partially agree. That's it. But I assume if you partially agree, that's still on the agree side. Fantastic. What gets me most about this quote, what I think is most amazing, is this quote is from 1632. This quote is from John Comenius in a book called Of the Things Requisite Before This Universal Method, when they were talking about educational reform back then. And I put this quote for context because I want us to keep in the back of our mind that these things that I'm talking about, these ideas of educational reform, these ideas of changing education, it all goes slowly. And it may not feel like we're making a lot of progress. But I hope that we would look at how we're teaching now and how people were being taught in 1632 and feel that we've made some advancements. But like I said, it's hard to see it when we're in the middle of it. I'm not really talking about, in this presentation, a lot of new and amazing and never heard of things before. What I'm really trying to hit with this presentation are the small differences that we can make in the classroom to help get us closer and closer to the change that we want to see. One of my favorite proverbs is an African proverb, and it's this one. It says, little by little, little becomes a lot. So again, keep this in the back of your mind throughout this whole presentation. I'm not saying that we need to throw out all of our lesson plans and we need to completely change the way that we've been teaching forever. That's too radical. I think the small changes in the classroom can make the biggest difference. And I want to talk about some of the small changes we can make to help prepare the students that we have with those life competencies, 21st century skills, and whatnot. Now, why is this important though? Why did we call it 21st century skills? Why is this something that's still being talked about? This idea of 4C's, this idea of lifelong learning, future ready learners? Well, it's because we are now in a fourth industrial revolution and a fifth industrial revolution is changing fast. You may have heard industry 4.0. Some people think we're in industry 4.5. Industry 5.0 is coming soon. It's not just that we're developing, it's the rate of change that everything is developing. When we talk about the first industrial revolution, that was the revolution that used water and steam power. When we had, the train engine and that sort of thing. The second industrial revolution, well, that involved electric power and mass production. And then the third industrial revolution, this was electronics and information technology. And this is around 1994, 1995. I remember, believe it or not, when I went to school, we didn't have the internet. There was no way we could have Zoomed because I didn't even have a modem until I got to university. I'm old. But in that short amount of time from my lifetime, not even my lifetime, but from when I was a teenager to now, we've completely eclipsed that third industrial revolution, and we're now in a fourth one that's building on the third. But this revolution that's been occurring since the middle of the last century. And this is the fusion of technologies that's blurring the lines between the physical and the digital. Sometimes it's referred to as, the Internet of Things. This idea of, my smart devices not just being used for communication, but being interacted with in my physical world. The fact that I can, that in some cases, I can control my thermostat from my smartphone. This is incredible. And this is where we're at. Now, why does this matter to us? Well, it matters to us because as language teachers, we have the duty to teach language. As language teachers, especially English language teachers, we want to make sure that our students can communicate and have English as an additional language. Language teaching is teaching language, but language teaching is also teaching. And at its core, if we look at this quote from Michael Fullan, the moral purpose of teaching is to make a positive difference in the lives of students and to help produce citizens who can live and work productively in increasingly dynamically complex societies. I like this quote a lot. And you might be saying, yeah, of course it is. We didn't always agree with this. I remember in the year 2000, when we first started talking about 21st century skills, there being a big debate. As an English language teacher, is my job to teach creativity or is my job to teach the present perfect? I think it's my job to teach the present perfect. And we thought that it was an either or, that we either taught the subject or we taught for the future, and it couldn't relate. But Michael Fullan reminds us it doesn't have to be an either or. Yes, in our language classes, we teach language, but we're still teachers. And so we make a positive difference in the lives of students, and what we teach helps them produce citizens who can live and work productively in increasingly dynamically complex societies. And our society is complex. It is a cliche, but it is still true. Because of the rate of change in this new industrial revolution that we're still in the middle of, we have students who are going to graduate and get jobs that we can't even think of yet. When I was going to university, it was pretty clear you were studying to be an accountant or a psychologist. There weren't all of these new and crazy jobs. Now, you could be an aging solutions consultant or a cryptocurrency banker or a 3D food printer chef. It is still true that we are preparing students for jobs that don't exist yet. How do we do that? Well, I think that whether we're talking about jobs that don't exist yet, it's also important not to lose sight of jobs that do exist. Because the skills that employers are looking at are also changing. This is just an example study. This is not a complete idea of all the research that we've done at Cambridge, but this is one study that kind of influenced us. But what I did was I wanted to update it. And so you can see that this is from the National Association of Colleges and Employers, and they have surveyed employers. It has a bit of a United States bias. We'll get to Vietnam in a second, but it has somewhat of a US bias, but I still think it's interesting. I wanted something from 2021 because I wanted something post-COVID. And if we look at the skills that just last April, according to their survey, that employers said that they were looking for right now, I think it really gives us hope as language teachers to let us know that we are in the business of giving students the skills that they need for the future. I'm going to show you what the top 10 skills employers want are. And as I show them to you one by one, what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to count to yourself how many of these skills you think are natural fits for the language classroom. Which skills could we develop as language teachers? I'll be honest with you, I don't think it's all 10, but I think it's quite a few. So I'm going to show you. Don't put it in the chat box yet. I'll ask you when I get to the last 10, how many of these you think are natural fits or things that can be developed in the language classroom. The ability to work in a team. Problem-solving skills. Analytical and quantitative skills. Communication skills, verbal. Communication skills, written. Initiative. Leadership. Technical skills. Flexibility and adaptability. And a strong work ethic. Out of those 10, I'd like for you just to type in the chat box, how many of those do you think fit in the classroom? I see 8, I see 10, I see 5, I see 8. Some people say all of them. Some people say 7, 8, 5, all. For me, when I think about most of the classes that I taught, you know, I was lucky in my time as an English teacher. I taught kindergarten, and then I taught IELTS preparation and EAP. I don't know if I would say all when I think of all the classes I've taught, but at least 6 for me. And this, I think, is important because so many times when we go to workshops about the skills of the future and active learning and future readiness and 21st century skills, the idea of STEM, science, technology, English and mathematics, engineering and mathematics comes up a lot. But I think that actually the language classroom is the classroom where we can practice and develop these skills, oftentimes even more than the mathematics classroom, even more than the science classroom. I think that we do more than just teach verbs. We have the opportunities to develop quite a few of these skills. Now, I want to say that you might criticize me and say, well, that was in the United States, but this is Vietnam, this is Southeast Asia. I mean, UNICEF in October 2020 did a very similar survey just for businesses in Vietnam. The top things they're looking for: creativity, teamwork, and active listening. What we did at Cambridge was we looked at research from all around the world. And what's amazing is that it came back the same answers again and again and again, regardless of where the survey was taking place. And what I think is, if we really think that those skills are what we should be developing, and we think that they can fit, we have a responsibility as language teachers to put them in our classroom, because the moral purpose of teaching is to make a positive difference in the lives of students and to help produce citizens who can live and work productively in increasingly dynamically complex societies. So what did we do if we summed up all the research? Again, those were just 2 studies, but at Cambridge, we had a lot of research where we looked at a lot of studies around. And overall, if I were to summarize what we found when we wanted to answer the question, how can we prepare our students to succeed in a world that's changing fast? We saw the increasing need to work together with people from around the world. That came up again and again and again. The ability to think creatively and solve problems. To analyze sources more critically. To communicate our views effectively, and to maintain a positive mindset in an increasingly complex world. So at Cambridge, we asked ourselves the question, how? How can we do it? How can we support the development of these skills? Especially in our English language teaching classes. And we worked hard, we worked long, and we created a framework to relate English teaching to future readiness. And I'd like to share it with you now. This is a graphical representation of our framework. And I really like it because our designers made it into a circle. Our first version that you may have seen 2 years ago, if you saw me, it was very much a square and it was in the blocks. But now they've made it into a circle. And I'm glad they made it into a circle because it fits how I like to think of our framework. Because I think of our framework like a pizza. And just for fun, just so I know that you're still with me, in the chat box, could you type for me your favorite pizza topping? I would like to know, what is your most favorite thing What is your most favorite kind of pizza? Go ahead. I want to see something. James Brown says jalapenos, very spicy. Tenius just says cheese. We want cheese. Ooh, somebody wants 4C's. We got crab. We got seafood. We got chicken and cheese. Seafood. Pineapple. That's the controversial one. Some people want pineapple. Somebody already admitted it. You're going to hate me, pineapple. Yeah, that's very controversial, but I promise you, I don't like pineapple on my pizza, but I'm not going to judge you if you do. Well, thank you so much for your answers. The reason why I asked is because I think this pizza analogy really helps me how I think of it. And the reason why I like to think of it as a pizza is if you notice down in the bottom, we had what we call foundational layers. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on foundational layers, but I just want to say that the foundational layers, we take them for granted. I think that this is like the base of the pizza. And our foundational layer starts with the dough, the crust, and that's discipline knowledge. And I don't think a lot of people, if I said, what's your favorite kind of pizza? Most people don't say just the crust. I only want the crust. But if we don't have the crust, if we don't have the base, it's not a pizza. And I think that our base, our crust is discipline knowledge. In this case, English teaching. And just like with a pizza, we have to have it in every single bite. And so discipline knowledge, it needs to be the foundation of what we do. We need to remember that we are having English classes where we try to bring in the 4C's, not critical thinking classes where we try to bring in some English. So that's how I think of it. The next step is digital literacy. I think that this is like the sauce. I think it's like the sauce. Now, I need to say that digital literacy doesn't mean that we're using apps and we're being digital. Digital literacy means that if we choose to bring in technology, we're bringing it in the right way. It's how we search for things. It's about taking care of privacy issues. It's about protecting our students online. Digital literacy isn't about using 500 apps. Digital literacy is about being smart with digital. I think it's just like any sauce. You can have as little or as much on it, but you need it there and you get it in every bite. And then the next one, emotional development, for me, that's like the cheese. And I think it's like the cheese because the cheese, it can be something that's underneath and part of the base, or it can be something extra. You know, I saw somebody in the chat, they said they like 4 cheese pizza. Cheese can be a topping, or cheese can be part of the base. And I think the same thing is true with emotional development. There needs to be things that we're bringing into our classrooms, with classroom management, with making a safe place, with developing a growth mindset that's just embedded into what we do. But we can also be more direct about it. We can do things like focus on our emotions or talk about sounding empathetic. And so it could also be a type of topping. My point is that in every single bite of a pizza, you get some crust, some sauce, and some cheese. And throughout our teaching, I think that we need to make sure that the discipline knowledge comes first, digital literacy, that if we bring in technology, we're bringing it in the right way, and emotional development is there. The foundational layers, though, like I said, that's a different topic, but I just wanted to stress that we think that those are important. But then we have our competencies. And our competencies, here you can see that part of the framework. Those are like the toppings. That is your pineapple or your pepperoni or your crab. The point is, with the competencies, if you only like one topping, if you only like pepperoni on your pizza, fine, only use pepperoni. If you like everything on your pizza, you can put everything on. You can put as much or as little on as you like. And that's the way it needs to be when we integrate these life competencies as well. If you want to focus only on critical thinking, that's fine. If you want to focus on all of them, that's fine. It's based on your learner's needs. Now, I do want to point out that we do call them life competencies because competencies are about knowledge, skill, and attitudes. Sometimes you'll hear me refer to them as life skills just because I'm kind of lazy. Technically, I should say competencies, but if you want to think of them as life skills as well, pretty much the same thing. But they're called competencies because they encompass skills, but also the knowledge and the attitudes. And it's at this point that you might be thinking, so what? I've seen lists like this before. I came to this because it was about the 4C's. All you're telling me is something I already know. Well, here's where it gets special. Because at Cambridge, what we wanted to do was go further than what is ever done. And we created what I like to call our 3D, our three-dimensional framework. And I'd like to show you what makes it special now. The first part of it is width. And we have grouped the different competencies, the different toppings of the pizza into 6 main areas. And here you can see the 4C's, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and what we call creative thinking. We don't call it creativity, we call it creative thinking because there are parts of creativity that go beyond creative thinking. But when we look at the skills, we're really talking about creative thinking. That's what we mean by the 4C's. But we also added 2 more skills based on what employers are looking for and based on what our research told us. And that's learning to learn, what's sometimes called metacognition, and social responsibilities. And we've tried to be very careful on how we've defined them. So our definitions of these, and the reason why the definition is important, because if you ask a lot of teachers, do you want creativity in your classroom? I think they'll say yes. And then if you ask them, what is creativity? If I ask 100 teachers, I get 100 different answers. So creative thinking. When I talk about creative thinking, that is learners actively participating in creative activities, generating new ideas, and using these ideas to solve problems. I want to point out that in our framework, none of the competencies are problem solving because a lot of these skills are used together to solve problems. Problem solving is not a competency. Problem solving is the result when you use competencies. You can see on the next one, critical thinking. Learners identify patterns in relationships, evaluate ideas, and use these skills to solve problems. So both creative thinking and critical thinking to us is about problem solving. Then we have learning to learn, where learners develop practical skills to support and take control of their learning and reflect on their own progress. We have communication, where learners choose the most appropriate language to use in different situations. We're going to talk about that a lot later because I think a lot of times we think communication is happening in our class because our students are doing pair work or speaking. And yeah, we should focus on fluency and accuracy, but don't forget appropriacy is part of it as well. So learners choosing the appropriate language to use in different situations. They manage conversations and they express themselves clearly and confidently. Then we have collaboration, where learners work to get well together in groups through actively taking part in group activities, which includes listening to others and sharing tasks and finding solutions to problems. A lot of times we think collaboration is happening in our classroom because we've put students in groups, but really, all 4 people in the group are working on their individual part of the task. They're not working together. You know, there's a difference between being in a group and actually collaborating. And social responsibilities, which really has 3 different parts. Learners recognize and describe different roles and responsibilities in a variety of groups and understand cultural and global issues. Now, when I say that it's important that we have a 3D framework, it's not just that we've identified them and can talk about, you know, the width of them. We've taken that definition and we've made it go deeper and deeper. And this is important because this is what helps us as teachers actually bring it into the classroom. It's nice to have a theory, but if I can't do it practically, then the theory is worthless. So the depth is one of the things that helps make it practical. So we've taken each of those competencies, and if you remember my wheel, my big wheel, you can see that sprouting off of it in each of these things are different areas that we just talked about. And these are the core areas. For example, with creative thinking, there are 3 core areas we've identified: preparing for creativity, generating ideas, and implementing ideas and solving problems. And for each of the competencies, we've been able, like I said, to put 3 or 4 core areas into them. These are the core areas for learning to learn: developing skills and strategies for your own learning, taking control of your own learning, reflecting on and evaluating on your own learning. And collaboration, taking personal responsibility for your own contribution to a group task, encouraging effective group interaction, managing the sharing of tasks in a group activity, and working towards task completion. Then critical thinking. And this is important because not all thinking is critical thinking. We have creative thinking, we have other types of thinking. Critical thinking, I think, gets all the press. It's the one that everybody likes. But I think a lot of times teachers say, "Oh, I want my students to do some brainstorming because I want them to do critical thinking." Well, brainstorming is really creative thinking. What is critical thinking really? Well, our core areas are understanding and analyzing ideas and arguments, evaluating ideas and arguments, and solving problems and making decisions. And then again, communication. We can't take communication for granted. I often use the example of one time when I was in a classroom and we were doing a pair work activity. And I remember it like it were yesterday. I asked my students to do this activity in the course book, and it was about the past simple. And they said, "What did you do yesterday?" "I went to the movies." "And you, what did you do yesterday?" "I went to the movies with you." "Finish, teacher." And they were using the language accurately. They were reasonably fluent, but they weren't communicating. Speaking is more than just saying words. Communication is more than just getting it accurately or fluently. It has to do with using appropriate language and register. It has to do with facilitating interactions, and it has to do with the confidence and clarity of our message. And finally, social responsibilities, where we talked about understanding our responsibilities as part of the groups that we're in, and also showing intercultural awareness and understanding global issues. So, like I said, we've taken that framework, and with all of those toppings, we've really tried to define what they mean. And because we've taken those core areas, then we've developed components. We get deep. This is what you don't find in other lists. I'm not going to take you through all of them because it would be too boring, but to give you an example, we have creative thinking, which is our competency. We have preparing for creativity, which is our core area. And then we can break that up into components like participating in a range of creative activities, exploring issues and concepts, considering multiple perspectives, finding connection. It goes on and on and on. You get the idea. It's not just saying what they are, it's clearly defining them and then making them actionable. Our third dimension, if we have depth and width, then we have length. And what really makes our framework special is that we look at these components at different stages of the learning journey, because creativity that I would expect from an adult is different from creative thinking that I would expect for a kindergartner. It's still the same skill, but I would expect it to show itself differently. And too many lists of 21st century skills do not take the stage of the learner journey into account. We do at Cambridge. So when we look at the length, the depth, and the width, when we look not just at the foundational layers, but at the 6 competencies, and then really expand them into the components and the core areas, and then look at them throughout where they can be on the stage of the learner journey, that can get us some can-do statements and example language. And this is where, just like the CEFR, this is where we as teachers and educators can put them into our syllabus, can start designing activities. We can really make it practical into our classroom. Just to give you an example here with critical thinking, if that's the competency and the core area is understanding and analyzing links and arguments, and then the component is identifying and classifying information, we can see how that changes throughout the learner's journey. At the pre-primary level, it could just be sorting and arranging and describing objects by shape, color, weight. And if I can bring in an activity where I have different colored circles, different colored squares, different colored triangles, and point to them and ask students to tell me what it is, or, you know, can they point to all the orange things, or can they point to all the circles? I'm helping them at the kindergarten appropriate level with critical thinking. That's different if I go all the way down to at work, where I can summarize key points from business related documents and presentations. Same skill, but appropriate at the age level. Now, at Cambridge, we are overtly, that means we call it out, we put on the page, and covertly, we have these in our materials undercover. But we use these life competencies in our materials with everything that we write to make sure that we are teaching these along with language learning in our course materials. It's like a buy one, get one free. Remember, just like the Michael Fullen quote, we don't have to choose, am I teaching language or am I teaching critical thinking? We can do both at the same time. But let's look at how you can do it. I want to talk about some general tips for teaching life competencies. And I'm going to give you 3 different ways that you can do it. They go from what I think is easiest to more complex. And the easiest one is whatever course material that you are using. If it's a Cambridge book, if it's some other book, but if it's a Cambridge book, we try to make it easier because we have some mapping to it. But noticing and exploiting the opportunities that are already embedded in course materials. It's not about creating your own task. It's about looking at a course book and saying, hey, that fits with what I know about that competency. For example, we made a book called Power Up. This is an exams book. It's for young learners exams. This is Power Up Level 4. And you can see if I look on the page on part 2, I've got match to make correct sentences, write the sentences. That's the language. There was a bad storm, so we couldn't play in the park. They were wearing warm clothes because there was a lot of snow. You know, at this level, we're trying to teach them the language. But then I go to a mission. And in this mission, in groups, draw a map of a country you choose. Draw the weather symbols on the map. This is reviewing what we talked about, but we want them to work together on the same map so that they're collaborating. And our target language is that same language. The weather in the north is foggy and cold because it's near the sea. So I want to bring in communication and collaboration and the language at the same time. This is not an accident. This is designed that way by the authors of this book. Or if I look at a book for teenagers or young adults, Open World B1, this is about writing a formal email. And I think we've all seen activities like this, you know, whether it's a formal essay or a formal email, you know, it just goes through talking about do this, then there's a model answer, and then there's looking at the language. But if I look at part 4, it could be something as simple as look at these pairs of sentences, decide which sentence in each pair sounds more polite. This isn't about accuracy. It isn't about fluency. It's about the life competency of communication, because it's about how we sound when we write an email. You know, if I look at number 1, is all the equipment provided, or I'd like to know if all the equipment is provided, both of them are correct, but which one is appropriate? And using the life competencies this way reminds me as a teacher not to just give feedback based on the language, but if I want to bring in that aim, to give feedback based on the life competency itself. Now, this next part is the one that I'm most excited about. If you're still with me in the chat box, can you just say, I'm here? I want to make sure that I haven't talked too long. I want to make sure that you're still here. Okay, here. I want to see 10 more people. I'm here. Thank you, David. Thank you, Tao. I see you. Thank you. You're here, Deepa. Okay, fantastic. I want to make sure that you're awake, because I'm getting ready to give you something for free that I'm so excited about. And I don't know if you like free stuff. Me as a teacher, I like free stuff. Maybe you want to bring in the life competencies and you want to bring in an extra activity, or you want to modify an activity. You want to take it to the next level. We have developed life competency cards. We have one card, not for each competency, not for each core area. We have one card for each component. And This means that you can go and you can just look at this card and you can get an idea of how to use this competency right away in a class that you're already teaching. So for example, this is one of the cards for creative thinking. The core area is generating ideas and the component is generating multiple ideas. And the idea is, let's change it. When you encounter a song or poem in the course book, invite learners to suggest ideas for changing or substituting words, especially if it has a karaoke version. We don't have to sing the same verse every time. There's one great song in one of our books that's like, do you like eggs? Yes, I do. Do you like apples? Yes, I do. Do you like eggs and apples? No, I don't. Yuck. And we could work with our students to think of what's something else that maybe we like when it's by itself, but we wouldn't like it combined. And then we could add that to the song. We can write our own lyrics. What I like about these cards is it's not just about what we can do in the classroom. It's about, if you look at the bottom, there's ideas for if you're teaching online as well, ways to adapt it, because we understand this is COVID-19 right now. We're mostly teaching through Zoom. So we wanted to make sure that we had a way to use it in the classroom and a way to adapt it for online teaching. We have developed these cards. Again, there's so many of them. I don't even know how many, but there's more than 200. You start with the competency you like, then you go to the core area, and then you go to the component. But we have different cards based on the student's age. That was the activity if they were pre-primary or primary. What if they're teenagers? They don't want to just change the lyrics to the song. Okay, same component, but what can you hear and smell in the picture? When learners encounter a photograph in the course book showing a scene, ask them to work in pairs to formulate a good oral description of it. Yeah, you'll probably find that their descriptions only concern what's visible. On the board, draw an eye, an ear, a tongue, a hand, and a nose. Ask everyone to work in pairs again and discuss what sounds, what smells, what tastes, what textures. And then bring the class together and ask them if they've learned. This is generating multiple ideas using our senses. And that's what if I want that same component as an adult? If I teach adult or higher education, well, here's an activity called alternatively. You can write the word alternatively on a corner of the whiteboard. And when learners propose a solution, point to the word and ask them to offer a second alternative solution. Little things make a big difference. The thing about these cards, like I said, I'm going to give you a link where all of these cards are downloadable, absolutely free. You can go and you can use them in your classes tomorrow if you wanted to. So we've looked at 2 ways already. The third way, which is the most complex, but maybe you're in curriculum design, maybe you really want to go that extra mile, maybe you want to plan a lesson around a competency. Again, you don't have to use all of them. You know, it's like pizza toppings. If you only like pineapple, you could only do communication. But if you want to bring them all, the choice is yours. But maybe you want to develop your own lesson. Maybe you don't use the course book. Maybe you like making your own materials. Well, you can plan lessons around the competency core area, components, and can-do statements, and the example language. And this is what we do at Cambridge when we develop our materials. And I'm going to also give you a link to the booklets that have the components, the competencies, the can-do statements, the example language. Now, for me, that's a lot of work. I like course books. I would probably just do 1 and 2. But some of you really like to lesson plan. You like to go the extra mile. This is for you. What you need to do is you need to consider adding the life competency as a learning objective, as well as a linguistic learning objective, because remember, we're language teachers first. You know, this is about adding to our language lessons. Critical thinking shouldn't become the lesson. It's a language lesson that brings in critical thinking. Then you can use the framework to find suitable learning objectives. And that's going through the brochure yourself. And then consider any language that you need to teach. We've given example language, but you may need to modify it based on the level of your learners or what the task is. So we've just provided examples, but we haven't provided exact language. You need to think for yourself, what's the right language that my learners really would use in this task? In order to make that possible, like I said, we've developed a whole range of materials that we're giving away absolutely free. If you like free stuff, can you write free in the chat box? I don't know if people are excited about it. I love free. I mean, like I said, we put this into our materials, but this stuff is so good and our research is so good that even if you don't use Cambridge books, I hope you do, but even if you don't use Cambridge books, it's too good and too important to keep to ourselves. So we want you to use this in the classroom. That's why we're providing it. There's an introductory book. If you want to review this presentation, start with the introduction. Then we have life competency booklets for each of the 6 components, or competencies, I should say, and even one for emotional development. Because remember, emotional development, I said it's like cheese. It can be in the background or we can focus on it. And if emotional development is something you want to focus on, we've developed a booklet specifically for that as well. Or if you don't want to just do it by competency, if you want to focus on, I teach young learners or I teach teenagers, we've also put the same content instead of it by competency, by age group, so that you can look at just what applies to the age range that you teach. The choice is yours. And when you look at the book, like I said, this is a page from the book. It's going to show you the core area, the component, the example can-do statement that you can use as part of your lesson plan, and the example language. Again, if that's too complicated, if you think, I don't know where to start, then don't start with a booklet, start with the activity cards and get used to it. See what the activities feel like, and then start developing your own. Then, as you're doing this during the lesson, make students aware that they're developing the life competencies. I worry about students who think that they're not creative, even though they've just completed a creative task, because they haven't realized it. And giving these sorts of activities, they let us observe our students and give feedback on their language as well as the life competency. If I have said I want that activity to develop critical thinking, then I can say, hey, your language was good, but your idea, did you really think about what the person was saying? Did you really evaluate the idea? I, as a teacher, if I'm teaching teenagers or adults, for example, can give feedback on their, like I said, their use of the competency. Or I could say for my 2 students who said, what did you do yesterday? I went to the movies. And you know, your language was good, but you didn't sound interested in the other person. You didn't sound appropriate. I can give the feedback, and the life competencies helps me focus as a teacher on the feedback that I give. And also, I can encourage students to self and peer assess. I don't like to use good and bad in the classroom, so I like to use WWW and EBI. I like to ask students, give me 1 WWW, which means what went well, and give me 1 even better if. I like to remain positive. It would have been even better if you would have sounded, this way. And use your observations to determine your students' strengths and weaknesses, and use this to inform future lessons. And then after the lesson, reflect on it yourself. Share your successes and challenges. Maybe share with other teachers, and use what you've learned to plan the next lesson. I see that a lot of people are already saying in the chat box where to get it. I want to go ahead and share with you the links now. So take a screenshot or go ahead and take a photo. Or if you just want to look here, I see a lot of the links are going in the chat box now. The cards and the booklets are available at cambridge.org/CLCF. If you go there, you'll be able to find those. You'll also be able to find YouTube videos that explain the competencies in depth more. Absolutely 100% free. Also, if you're interested in more of our insights, or just you like what Cambridge can offer, I'd really encourage you to check out our YouTube channel. It's Cambridge UPELT. This is something that has a lot of resources. A lot of people don't realize we at Cambridge, we're a not-for-profit organization. Now, we want to make money. We need to invest in our research. We don't think profit is a bad word, but we want teachers to use our stuff. So there are so many resources that we've made available, and I'm sad by how many people don't go to our website to see everything that we have. So check out our YouTube channel, find another webinar recording. You won't get a certificate, but you'll get great things that you can use right away in your classroom. There's also a teacher development website that I'll leave up here just in case people want it. With some of our 2-hour online teacher development courses. They're very reasonably priced. They're not free, but they're under $30. They do come with a certificate, but they're to help people with your professional learning and development if you want to do some self-study to develop your skills. And then the last thing I'd say is don't forget our representatives in Vietnam. And this is their email address. If you liked, those pages that I showed of Power Up or Open World, or if you want to find materials that have life competencies already embedded in, ask. We won't lie to you. We don't want you to use the book if it's not what you need. But I get sad seeing teachers make their own materials that pretty much they spend 30 hours developing a worksheet when we already had a book that could have saved so much time for you. So if that's something that you're interested in, reach out to our representatives, Ho Chi Minh at cambridge.org. We'd love to hear from you. And again, why not try it? I challenge you to choose one life competency you would like your students to develop. Not all of them, just pick one. Download the booklet or life competency cards from that website, or use the framework to help you plan an activity to develop this life competency and add it into your lessons. I'd like to see you try to do that. That's my presentation. Can you show again the slide? I can show it now. You said after class. I'll leave that up right now, just so that you can get it. But the most important link that I want to encourage you for is cambridge.org/CLCF. That is my presentation. I think I went about 4 minutes over time. I'm so sorry, but we do have some time for some question and answer session. So Tran, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, Alan, please see some questions in the Q&A.
Okay, so I just do it myself. Okay, here we go. I've read in one article, says one of that digital literacy is a lower level set of skills and teachers should aim for digital competency. What do you think? I think that we're really getting too much into the definition instead of the idea of what we're talking about. And the idea of digital literacy, I don't think is lower level at all. Look, for me, digital literacy, I see a lot of people just bringing in apps into their classroom and not thinking about privacy, not thinking about, okay, I'm asking my students to sign up for this app, but what data are they collecting from the students? What's happening, with the way that my students are being safe online? Am I doing things to make sure that the comments are appropriate, that there's no online bullying going on in my classroom? It's not a Cambridge site, but I would encourage you, I'm going to put it in the chat box. One website that I really like is Common Sense Media. If you just Google that, that is pretty much where I like to get my ideas for digital literacy. When I'm looking at an app, when I'm looking at trying to be a better teacher, that's one of the things that I go for. Another thing which I really would like for you to consider, if you're really interested in that digital literacy component, because again, it's a bit off topic. I think that you should go and just Google what I'm putting in the chat box now, the digital teacher, and then Google the word Cambridge. Of course, we're Cambridge. We have a framework for digital teaching. And it includes in that wider digital context, this idea of digital literacy. I'm going to go ahead and stop talking about that answer now, but to make the longer answer short, is it lower level? No, I think it's a foundational level for everyone. And digital literacy, we should care about. Again, digital literacy is not bringing in the right app. Digital literacy is about being smart with technology, and it's relevant from pre-primary all the way up into higher education. Okay, how can we find the pie chart? It's on that website, so I'm going to go ahead and say that we got it. Thank you, David, for putting it in there. Yeah, I love it. I'm working on and fighting for today's topic every single day, innovation education. How do I create global citizens? How the academic settings? I hope Mr. Allen can share with us how to extend further onto today, materials to read. Okay, what you're talking about there with the global citizens, that's in the social responsibilities. And if you go to the social responsibilities booklet, in the back of that, that brochure, there's a bibliography with a lot of further reading. So I'd say that if that's one thing about global citizenship and global issues that you want to bring in, use the booklet, but look at the resources in the booklet. For all the booklets, if you want to explore further, there are ideas for further reading in it. Ms. Tran Lee, when will the slides for today's webinar be uploaded? I do not share my slides. And you can go ahead and go boo in the chat box now. I don't share the slides because I think that if you want the information, you should go to the PDF booklets, because some of my slides are just pictures. And, you know, if you look at the picture of the pizza in a year from now, you might be thinking, what was he saying about pizza? You know, for me, I think that we do presentations because they're a combination of the slides and the presenter. So I don't like to share my slides because, yeah, my slides are there, but you're listening to me, right? Right. Now, I will say that I think that VUS, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Tran, the video will be made available on the website. That's right, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes. So although I'm mean and I don't share my slides, I'd love for you to review with the video, and you can, you know, you can scrub the video and go back and forth and see the slides that way. But then you at least get my voice to explain what my idea was behind it. Because otherwise, I'm afraid that some of the information could be misinterpreted. So I hope that's okay. Oh, thank you so much for saying it's true. I do appreciate that, you know, that you agree with me there. So I think, how can teachers assess whether their activities align well? I think that that's a great question. What I would say is make sure that assessment doesn't just mean test, or that it means measuring, but I think that one of the easiest ways to assess is to ask the students. I don't think that life competencies are something that we actually right now need to absolutely measure with a grade. But when we talk about assessment, assessment is related to the feedback. So look at your aims. And if you really want to assess, think about what you would expect for your learners if they did an okay job, a good job, or a great job. Look for those outcomes, tell them what you're looking for, let them do the task, and then give them feedback. Assessment should be related to feedback more than it is just to the score. They're both aspects of assessment. Again, that's different than testing. Testing is part of assessment, not the other way around. And I'd really encourage you to look at a book that we have, if you're really into the research, about learning-oriented assessment. It's one of our studies in English language teaching. I don't have the link for it, but I'll put that in the chat box. Now, it's a research book, but the learner-oriented assessment cycle is really about joining up formative and summative assessment based on teachers' feedback. It's written by Dr. Nick Saville, who's from Cambridge Assessment English, head of our thought leadership. And it's very good if you really are interested in assessment. Of course, I can't answer that question in 2 minutes, but if you're thinking, I want a resource to really talk about assessment of these competencies, that's the way to do it. And then, does autonomy count as one of the competencies? I'm not sure that autonomy counts as one of the competencies, but I think that autonomy is really brought out in 2 of the different competencies. It's mentioned briefly in emotional development. So there's an aspect of it there. And I think autonomy is also part of learning to learn, being able to select your own resources. And so I think autonomy is kind of like problem solving. It's not a competency itself, but it's a result of using the competencies. So that's what I would say there. I think that that's all of the time that I have for questions. I hope that you got it. If you have more questions, contact our people, hochimin@cambridge.org. They can pass it on to me. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to help you find the resources that you need to bring them into your classroom. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Allen Davenport. Thank you all. We hope that you enjoyed our webinar today and will be able to apply the ideas to your teaching practice.
VUS, your English, your future.